As it turns out, the US economy is not immune to the wave of unemployment that is sweeping over the global economy. The June 2024 payroll report was more evidence that, first of all, we can't really trust the establishment survey. It doesn't seem to have the accuracy we would like. But more importantly, the unemployment rate continues to rise in tandem, in synchronization with unemployment rates around the rest of the world. The June 2024 payroll report had a whole bunch of information that suggested the US economy is not strong and not resilient. Starting with the unemployment rate reaching 4.1%. It's not the level, it's how fast it's gone and how long it's gone up in that same direction. The unemployment rate has risen 0.4% this year alone, and it's up 0.7 of a percentage point since the low last year. Those are very strong recession signals, and they're getting louder and louder. As it comes to the establishment survey, big downward revisions yet again to recent months. Last month's 277,000, that's gone. The prior month's stumble was even a bigger stumble. 111,000 jobs we all thought were gained that would have looked like a strong and resilient economy. Those just disappeared. So we've got the unemployment rate rising, lack of full-time jobs, still businesses cutting hours. At the same time, more and more people are questioning the major payroll number. And I'll give you an example. In the wake of today's report, in Bloomberg, the headline said this: the U.S. economic slowdown is looking more threatening. Worrying signs in the labor market mean the Fed's July meeting will point to policy easing sooner rather than later. And the reason is because the one metric we've been relying on for strong and resilient, that's what Jay Powell keeps saying and all the policymakers, the establishment survey, that's looking less strong and less resilient. And it's more importantly, it's looking less reliable. At the same time, one thing that we can rely on when it moves in this direction this much for this long a period of time, the unemployment rate is telling us the recession may have already begun. So Steve and Metre, let's talk about the payroll report. What was your impression, especially this divide between the establishment survey and the household survey may be less of a divide than it had been in previous months leading up to this?
Yeah, Jeff, because what I was concerned about is I see once again, you get this headline number and it looks pretty good, 200,000. What does a strong labor market at this point look like? If you are a central banker, this is a good number. But then you look at 111 downward revisions, and then you turn and look at the stock market just racing even higher. And as you said, the data is starting to suggest we're in the early stages of recession. And I keep hearing from investors, I'm not going to make the same mistake I made during the dot-com bubble. And I'm certainly not going to make the same mistake I made during the global financial crisis. And yet here we see it once again on the back that this headline survey data is just causing people to make bad decisions. It's not just investors. It's unfortunately the Fed, the policymakers. They go by these numbers, and yes, it gets downward revised, but there's just no confidence in this number at all. And that, of course, means there's no confidence in the economy, because you try to tell people on the employment line, hey, don't worry, look at all the jobs that are being created, and they don't buy it either. And then when you're in that position, it's really easy just to lose confidence about going and looking for work and participating in the labor market, because what the government's telling you is going on and what you're actually seeing going on are two completely different things.
Yeah, about the revisions, not only were the recent months revised down by a cumulative 111,000, which is again, first of all, that's an enormous cumulative revision on a short run basis. But that has been over the last couple of years, that has become standard practice and normal. We almost sort of just expect it to happen nowadays. But on top of these short run revisions, there are going to be benchmark revisions coming up that even the Federal Reserve has acknowledged, because the QCEW numbers were substantially weaker going into the end of last year. We don't have the first quarter estimates just yet, but those are coming out, I believe, in the next couple of weeks or next month. I forget when the QCEW comes out, but those are going to come out and very likely going to show even more weakness still. So the reliability of the main number that everybody looks at to say this is the strong and resilient economy, as I said, even mainstream voices are saying we don't think it's all that reliable as much anymore. Jay Powell at his press conference last month said, we know that the establishment survey is a bit overstated. And even the FOMC meeting minutes that were released just this week, They said the recently released fourth quarter data from the quarterly census of employment and wages, or QCW, suggested that while the strong reported rate of payroll increases last year may have been overstated, job gains were still solid. So last year was overstated but solid. This year, still overstated, but now much less solid. And you could see where everything is moving, and everybody understands where everything is moving. And it's not into further strength and resilience. It's into more questions about really what is the state of the labor market. And we don't have solid answers from the payroll numbers itself. We have to look at the other side.
Yeah, Jeff, I mean, this is kind of where you take a look at, the initial weekly claims and the continued unemployment claims, because they're starting to give you a much more accurate picture of what's going on in the economy. And it's hard to tell people, hey, look at this great headline number. Meanwhile, you've had week after week after week of continued unemployment claims rising. And this is starting to tell people one very clear message, that if you lose your job, there's a good chance you're not going to get another one. Now, some people are, but the problem is, as that number builds, it's just building up a backlog of workers who are eager to go back to work, but they can't find anything. And of course, their consumption starts to get cut because their wages are dropping. That's a big factor here. And that lack of spending leads to other people losing their jobs. And suddenly you start getting this anticipation from workers, this fear, because if they know if they lose their job in a good jobs market, well, I might be unemployed for a few weeks, but I can get another one. In this market, you lose your job, you don't know where you're going to be. And that's dangerous. That gets people to cut their spending in a big way. And particularly now there's a problem because energy prices are back up, and that means gas prices are up, and that means, of course, here we're getting pinched again, as we've seen in the past, that rising energy prices at the wrong time for consumers. So it's like a double whammy going on here. You have rising continued claims, you have rising energy prices, and yet here we have the headline survey on the other side saying, hey, everything's kind of rosy, but not so quick. Because as you said, Jeff, we know in the months to come, this is going to get revised down substantially. The danger here is we could actually see at some point maybe a print around 100,000 non-farm payroll, and then the next month they get revised negatively. I mean, that would be, to me, not a surprise, but to the market, a huge shock.
We also have to keep in mind, too, that of that 206,000 June estimate, 70,000 of it was from the government, not just the U.S. federal government, but largely state governments too. So the government hiring boom is still going on. So as far as the private economy is concerned, private payrolls this month were just 136,000, which is already in that stall speed danger zone. And it has been over the last several months too, because the private payroll number were revised down sharply as well. So over the last 3 months, at the same time, we've been hearing from companies talking about their customers and consumers have no money. Here we see a substantial deceleration in private payrolls, to say nothing about the household survey, just private payrolls. They have slowed down substantially, which tells us that companies must be doing something. They must be taking more steps to control their costs, not because they believe the economy is about to take off in the second half, but the opposite. They're looking at the situation and thinking, consumers have no money, or customers have no money. We need to start looking more seriously at actually letting people go. We're not going to hire more. We're going to start cutting more hours than we already have. We saw that in the household survey with full-time jobs, which didn't go anywhere. Those have been down big time as well. So we're getting more evidence and more solid evidence. And even on the establishment survey side, a big one, temporary jobs plummeted in June by 50,000. That is a huge cyclical indicator, because if you're a business that's under pressure and you're looking at cutting costs, the easiest cost to cut are employees that are not your employees, that you're hiring out on a temporary basis. So the plummet in temporary jobs, along with the stuff we see in the household survey, the unemployment rate rising to 4.1%, all of it combined tells us that exactly what we've been hearing from McDonald's and Starbucks and Target is showing up because of the labor market not being strong and resilient, but quite the opposite.
And something I'd like to add to that, Jeff, is we've been seeing in all of these regional manufacturing surveys from the Fed, the ISM, S&P Global, And it continues to tell us one thing, that manufacturers are cutting hours and cutting employment. But yet when you look at the non-farm payroll report under the manufacturing subsection, you didn't see that show up. And maybe it's coming with a lag, because for the first time now we have minus 8,000. So here you have 8,000 high paying jobs. Now we don't know about the other jobs, but these went into the negative. And so this is dangerous now, because we're seeing high paying workers hit the unemployment line with absolutely, again, no sign that they're going to see a chance at getting another job. And as far as large employers, we're seeing them shifting, getting rid of some departments and scaling back and focus on those where there's profitability and adding a few people there. But you're right. If you're thinking about a second half rebound, whether it's a no landing, off landing scenario, you call it what you want, employers don't buy it. Now, there was a point years ago where they did believe it. They said, hey, we think the economy is going to boom. And they backed it up by hiring a ton of people. This time, there's no validation, no confidence that there's going to be any sign of a second half rebound. More, what it's looking like is a second half recession.
You know what, Steve? I think along those lines, what we would be seeing if there was a second half rebound, setting aside the establishment survey, on the household survey side, we would see a lot of employers who have been cutting their employees from full-time to part-time start bringing them back on full-time, right? Because that's the easiest thing you can do. On the opposite side, it's really easy to get rid of temporary workers when you're more pessimistic. And when you're more optimistic, it's much easier to bring those employees that you have put on part-time, bring them back to full-time, work more hours out of them if you become more optimistic. We haven't seen that. We've seen the exact opposite. According to the household survey, full-time jobs are down by 1.5 million since last November, and they show no signs of turning around. And part-time jobs have only partly offset that, which means on net, over the last 7-8 months, really going back to, as we keep talking, we talked about this from the very beginning, back to September and October. We said at the time, you could tell something was changing. And here we have, with the benefit of hindsight perspective, we have the evidence that shows, even the establishment survey, that something was changing in the labor market. But if employers and businesses were becoming more optimistic, not less, they'd at least be bringing some of those part-timers back onto full-time. And that's just not happening. It's still going in the wrong direction, because full-time jobs were down sharply in May, and then they were down a little bit more in June. And the household survey, which is back and forth and quite noisy on a monthly basis, but again, you step back and look at the last 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, it continues to move in the wrong direction. And as the other thing we've been saying all along too, more and more the data keeps moving in that direction, not in the opposite direction. We keep getting more and stronger recession signals and fewer and less strong rebound or recovery or reflation signals. The recession stuff gets louder and louder all the time. And again, I keep coming back to that 4.1% unemployment rate. It's a low level, but it's the direction it's moving, and the fact that it's moved up more consistently in recent months, which is, just like you said, continued jobless claims. That's one that's making a consistent move here. And not only does it tell us that the recession signals are growing, it's telling us that things are moving more quickly in that direction too.
Yeah, Jeff, because you don't have to be a PhD economist or a member of the Federal Reserve to actually understand what's going on here. Because as we know, Powell said, we're going to see a floor, or a ceiling, that is around 4% on the unemployment rate. But again, I did not go to school to become a doctor of economics. So here's the easy way, the regular guy way of figuring this out. Take a chart of the unemployment rate, overlay a chart of continued unemployment claims. And if you keep seeing continued claims rise, there's this just really complete and obvious relationship between the two, where one goes, the other follows. And so this is dangerous, because we know that the weekly claims are going higher, and that at some point, perhaps next month and the following month, as the government data catches up to what we'll say is more real-time data, we know the unemployment rate's going to go higher, and we know Powell's going to say something around the favorite word is coming, unexpected. We didn't see this coming, and we're rather surprised by it. But really, you don't have to be, because I encourage people when they go out, Jeff, is just to look around and maybe talk to the people where you're doing business at. And the area that we live in is very high concentration of leisure hospitality. People come to the beaches, they come to Orlando, and they spend money during the summer. And one thing, Jeff, that's just really odd to me, it's not that busy right now. And when I talk to people in the service industry, they tell me the same thing. I remember summers past, if I wanted to go out to eat, I'd be like, well, I better wait till 8 o'clock because there's no way I could even get, a seat at a bar if I wanted to because it was packed. Today, I walk into restaurants and I can get a table, I can get a seat at a bar, I can get a seat anywhere because they're not that busy. And that's what I'm hearing from the service staff. They're saying we weren't expecting it to be this slow. And what that's turning into is I'm hearing them say, yeah, my employer's starting to cut hours, something you would not expect during the summer. But it's broad-based. Everywhere I turn, businesses just aren't that busy. And we're seeing that, of course, backflowing into this headline data at some point.
Yeah, we talked about the ISM non-manufacturing and a whole bunch of other stuff too, right? The ISM non-manufacturing, ISM services was incredibly weak yet again. It was the worst number it had been in 4 years, going back to May 2020. That corroborates the picture that we're getting from the labor market data, which suggests that Jay Powell and his pipe dream that the unemployment rate is going to plateau right at 4%. It's actually even worse, Steve, as I know you know this. The FOMC minutes, which came out in the summary of economic projections and the staff projections and all the model projections and everything else, the staff projections might have been the most egregious, where they said they ran all the 30,000 Monte Carlo simulations or whatever they do with those Furbis models and everything else, and they said, what we're expecting of the U.S. economy is, yes, we expect the unemployment rate to get up to around 4.1%, maybe 4.2%, and then decline through the second half of this year and be gentler and a little bit lower into 2025. So what you would have to do, or the economy would have to do, would be that everything has to turn around in the next couple months, which means we would need to see signs of that turnaround happening right now. And as we're talking about here, we actually see only the opposite signs. The ISM non-manufacturing is a big one because that suggests services economy is already feeling the effects of recession and the labor market weakness. We've got the unemployment rate that looks like it's moving up steadily and not for good reasons. I've heard that too. As the payroll report numbers came out and the unemployment rate picked up, everybody said, well, the unemployment rate's moving up for the good reasons, which is companies are still hiring workers. They're just not hiring enough workers to keep up with population growth. And while that might have been the case last year, when you actually look at the data, which I'm convinced nobody actually does, the labor force actually flatlined and went a little bit lower since last October. So it isn't a case of the good unemployment where companies are still hiring and they're just not hiring enough. They stopped hiring. The household survey said they stopped hiring. And so the unemployment rate is rising for bad reasons too. So the idea that the unemployment rate signals just a modest slowdown into disinflation, exactly what the Fed was trying to engineer, would require everything to stop on a dime and turn completely around and go the opposite direction, when all of the evidence that we continue to get from all over the economy, including the rest of the global economy, where we see a wave of unemployment rising there, everything would have to stop like right now and turn completely around and start strengthening into the second half of the year, when we keep getting more evidence that it's actually going in the wrong direction in a much quicker rate.
And Jeff, we have a lot of evidence that says you're 100% right here. And with earnings season just getting ready to get kicked off, I have a hunch that we're going to hear from a lot of companies tell us exactly what's going to validate all of this is that demand is coming down. And that's what I think, the media is starting to pick up on, and other experts are starting to realize the Fed's got this wrong. They always do, but the evidence is mounting. And I think we'll get that here over the next few weeks. That's game over. I got to,
Steve, the spread between the 5-year and 10-year, that's already bull steepened, where the 5-year has gone down much faster than 10-year. So that's a little. It's not. I mean, that's not conclusive because we've seen that happen a couple of times over the last couple of years. But that's the first step in the bull steepener.
It's getting close.